These elections are extraordinary in every sense. All the rules of the game that the ruling party could set to win, they did.
Hello and welcome to The Human Rights Defender, a podcast series in which we'll explore the work and lives of brave individuals standing up for our human rights. My name's Philip Merrill. I'm Communications Officer at Civil Rights Defenders, an international human rights organisation. And in this opening season, we'll be taking a closer look at the Western Balkans and Turkey, regions in which democracy and the rule of law have come under growing strain in recent years. In episode 5, we're speaking to Vanja, who's director of the Man's Investigative Network in Montenegro. She's one of the most influential figures in uncovering the deep-rooted links between organised crime, corruption, and the state, for which she's been on the receiving end of aggressive and quite frankly despicable smear campaigns by the government and its associated media. And while we're speaking, much of the world, Western Europe especially, is focused on developments in Belarus, where citizens are resisting what they see as election rigging by an authoritarian regime. Vanja, thank you so much for joining us in what is surely a hectic period for you. This Sunday, your country will be going to the polls. Montenegro, it should be mentioned, the NATO member state and frontrunner for EU accession, according to many, has similarly been effectively ruled by one party and one man for 3 whole decades. Is it fair to be making such parallels with Belarus, do you feel? And how confident are you going into Sunday that democratic processes will be respected and that we can expect a fair and free election?
I think that upcoming elections are very challenging, even more challenging than we experienced it before. Before, it was quite common that the ruling party is misusing the state funds and different kind of public resources in order to create pressure or buy people's votes. It was very common also to employ people in the public administration in order to get their votes, and there was a very famous recording affair where the media published information from the sessions of the top level officials of the party who were saying that when you give a job to one person, you get 4 votes at the elections. They were also describing various other ways, including misuses of donations and loans provided by international financial institutions for buying votes, in particular of the poorest categories of population, and also including people dealing with agriculture, elderly people, and people who have less access to the media. The problem at these elections is that in addition to the existing practices, we have the epidemic, and the government, with the excuse of the epidemic, adopted so-called third package of the economic measures. The problem is that information about the spending, despite the law obliging the government, is not public. That we don't really know how the money that is supposed to help to the people to fight epidemic is really used, and whether some of these funds are misused. We managed to prove that in some cases, for example, the Ministry of Agriculture have recently hidden over 600,000 euros that they have spent from the loan provided by the World Bank for agricultural workers throughout Montenegro. So the situation is providing the ruling party with more than ever advantage when it comes to the funds and its misuses. When it comes to the money, it's very complicated. There are very many sources of money that we didn't see before, that we are noticing at these elections, and many corrupted practices which were supposed to be eradicated by the adoption of the loan financing of political parties and its changes, which were also adopted by the ruling party itself. However, it's really working in practice as we are used to. The law, what is written on the paper is one thing, and what institutions enforce is another thing. So we expect. We also have one interesting aspect of this story. There was a businessman who was very close to the leader of the ruling party, who leaked the information to the media about the so-called envelope affair, the cash that was given as donation to the ruling party, and which was not recorded. It was published 2 years ago or so, and now that person is, of course, He's investigated by special prosecution for some of his other businesses, and he's currently in London announcing that he might inform the public about some other issues related to illegal financing of political parties, but it didn't happen yet. So it's really complicated, and it's really interesting times to monitor the situation.
How do elections this year differ from previous years? And just to give a bit of context for listeners about how controversial this process can be in Montenegro, the last time the country held parliamentary elections in 2016, there was an attempted coup d'etat on the actual day of the elections, allegedly by various foreign actors. But a lot has changed in the meantime. And so when you see the campaign violations this time round, how do they differ? And also when you're investigating such issues, how do your experiences differ depending on whether you're investigating the ruling party or opposition parties?
It's absolutely completely different approach. When we're talking about the ruling party, the prosecution puts everything in the shelf as long as it is possible, depending on the public pressure and international pressure that is exerted on the prosecution. All the evidences we provided to the prosecution regarding to the recording affair I mentioned regarding the use of public funds for political purposes were just rejected without any reasonable explanation. The cases related to illegal financing of the ruling party prior to the presidential elections were allegedly money of the poorest categories of people, and I'm talking about IDPs, mainly Roma, which are in social need, which are living in deep poverty. They were giving a couple of €1,000 per person as donations to the ruling party on the very same day, and in the very same bank, even in the very same premises of the bank, and which was never recorded that hundreds of people actually came and did that there. So we suspected that it's money laundering, and the special prosecutor said more than 2 years ago that they're going to investigate the case, and he's still silent about it. On the other side, when it comes to the opposition, the special prosecutor is unbelievably eager to process everything, and it looks like the coup d'etat case is the case of his life. Unfortunately, the public is not yet really convinced about that the prosecution has enough evidences. I'm following the part which is related to the money more than other parts, and I can tell you that it's far from being proven something that we largely suspect. I can confirm definitely that in 2016 elections there was way much more money from both ruling party and that particular opposition party than they ever reported, and we have evidences for that. But the prosecution, unfortunately, did not manage to prove that case, despite of going after them for some kind of conspiracies, Russian spies and all the other stuff. This part about the money, I don't see enough evidences. And I see a very different approach by the prosecution towards different political structures. On the other side, the situation is even more complicated when we are talking about the political situation and the foreign funding. There are many accusations that there are funds coming from other countries, in particular Serbia and Russia, and that money is being channeled through various actors to support part of the opposition parties. We are monitoring how the money is being spent for the elections. We can see that there are already some influences from some countries, in particular some influences from Serbia. We can see even some investments from the Serbian government into particular groups that are connected to political parties, to some political parties in the opposition. And unfortunately, we can also see the involvement of the media from abroad, despite of Montenegrin regulations, where Montenegrin institutions are supposed to stop such practices. The situation is even more complicated than that, because this we saw also at the previous parliamentary elections in 2016. Now we have also a quite huge public pressure at the ruling party and the involvement of the Serbian Orthodox Church because of the law that was adopted at the very end of December last year by a thin majority in the parliament that is envisaging a confiscation of the church's property. There were a number number of public protests organized by the church. Those are the biggest public protests ever in Montenegro, and these protests were stopped due to COVID epidemic, but however they revived more recently near the elections. So the situation is very complicated, but we don't know what is going to happen on the day of the elections. Power changes things. We will see who will get how many votes and what will happen. What we experienced in the past is that whenever the ruling party lacked majority, they actually somehow by some magic, one or more people from the opposition parties actually turned and went to vote for the ruling party. The opposition was claiming that it is political corruption, but the prosecution have never ever investigated any of these cases. So what I'm saying is, if they need the majority, they will buy the majority.
So aside from the financing side, which other irregularities could you anticipate on election day? And what's the role of the media in all this? How fair has the media landscape been throughout this election process?
I mean, first of all, we are having the elections without knowing the rules of the elections. Today, we don't know the rules of the elections. The Constitutional Court nullified the decision of the State Election Commission regarding who has a right to vote in terms of those people who are in self-isolation due to COVID. And now we don't know how many people who will vote. We don't know how, because the law is not regulating that you can vote outside of your living premises, which are regulated. You can vote only on the polling station or in your home where you are registered in the Ministry of Interior that you live. If you are on another location, you cannot vote. Now you can, but we don't know how. And we're going to have elections on Sunday. Yesterday, the Agency for Prevention of Corruption published the opinion that there are certain media who are not media according to them, and who do not have to report and respect the rules regarding the law on financing on political parties and the media. So 2 months after the election campaign started, 5 days basically before the elections, we have changes in the rules of the game regarding the financing and the media space, and we have unknown rules of the game regarding the voting. So and the voter registry is final. It has to be completed and final 10 days before the elections. So what is going to happen? Who is going to vote? Especially in the border areas where you have a number of people who actually live in other countries like Bosnia, Serbia, Kosovo, Albania, and who might still have Montenegrin citizenship because they were born in Montenegro. They are not supposed to be in the registry. So these elections are extraordinary in every sense. All the rules of the game that the ruling party could set to win, they did. Through various decisions by the parliament, by the government, by so-called coordination body for whenever they couldn't make some legal decision, then they made this body made of government officials and doctors who are at the same time member of the ruling party, top members of the ruling party, which is called NKT, some kind of committee for the COVID. And that body is then making decisions, even if those are not in line with the laws or anything. So whatever they needed, we are in the classic situation of state capture.
Now, when you look at this tense pre-election atmosphere, when you factor in the devastating impact that coronavirus has had on the tourist industry this summer, and for those who don't know, the Montenegro economy is vastly dependent on tourism, but particularly when you see the mass protests which have rocked the country over the past year, which have been organized by the Serbian Orthodox Church week in, week out, do you get a sense that society is reaching boiling point and deep-rooted in divisions? And if so, and if change, for better or for worse, is around the corner, how well is civil society positioned to harness and be the driver of this change?
I think we have 3 scenarios. One scenario is that after the elections, if the government wins, I mean, all scenarios are about them basically winning in this or that way. But one scenario is the church is continuing with the protests and mobilizing people, not only people who are supporting the church, but also people who are poor and have nothing to, live on. Second scenario is, for some reason, church fails in that, and then actually civil society, people somehow organize themselves, and then we have protests which are purely social and economic. Or the third scenario is the government immediately after the elections, especially if they've been with a stronger majority, tries to kill any kind of the protest immediately, like stop it immediately, arrest people, and get more radical and more kind of offensive. If they engage more into the force, I don't know how the people will respond, because people respond very badly to the police force. Yes, they are scared, but they are also angry. And it's really hard to know what will happen. But I think that anyhow, we're gonna have very, very, very interesting time in autumn. It's a question. You know what is the main question? The main question is whether these people will be mobilized with some productive goal or otherwise. Because I have to tell you one thing, the church is not really a champion of the human rights in Montenegro, nor the parties that are aligned to the church and that are very right-wing. Those parties were already publicly saying that NGOs are foreign spies, that they should be closed down, that they should be arrested, and all these things. So if someone like that is actually mobilizing the people, even people who are not their supporters, simply because they are poor and they want somehow to address that, then we might end up even in a war situation. But if there will be a space for some other type of expression of unsatisfaction, then we might have some positive change. It's really hard to estimate.
Where precisely would you pinpoint the problem when it comes to the respect for democracy and basic human rights in Montenegro? The European Commission, in its recent non-paper, stressed the lack of progress in prosecuting attacks against journalists as its key concerns, as well as the vulnerability of the judicial system. Do you agree with these assessments? And in your eyes, which exact elements of the state, or society for that matter, do you feel are holding the country back?
I think the fight against organized crime, fight against corruption, and the freedom of media are the essential issues, because those are the basic pillars of the corrupted government. Now we are experiencing even bigger problems when it comes to the freedom of media and freedom of speech. Now we experience people being arrested for what they posted on Facebook. I'll give you only one example. A person posted a cover page of one media from Serbia saying that the prime minister got COVID, and that person was arrested for distributing the fake news. It is becoming very common that people experience police on their doorsteps because they wrote that they dislike a police officer or head of the police or the prime minister himself, or because they share something that the media published which were not punished by the institutions. And so it is really decreasing space for public activists, and especially for the common people. At least someone who's present in the media can somehow defend themselves. But what about common people? What about people who just simply express their dissatisfaction with whatever the ruling party is doing? They should expect police showing up at their doors, keeping them in prison for a day or two during the times of epidemic, in a situation which is not providing their safety when it comes to their health. So I think it's really also we experienced something which is repeating every now and then. Quite recently in Budva, the force, the police in Budva municipality, while they were trying to stop the protest organized by one opposition party, they started beating up people around on the streets, including the people that were lying on the floor and not resisting anyhow to the police, saying that they are not fighting back. We have videos which were published, and we don't have a single police officer who was fired and who ended up in prison for doing all that. So I think that the regime is sending a message that they are not going to tolerate further protests, that if they win at these elections, the church and whoever else, I'm saying the church because now they are organizing all these public events, but whoever else as well would not be free to protest publicly, would not be free to publicly comment on what they think about the work of the public officials. So I really think that we are entering into even worse situation when it comes to the human rights, and in particular the right to free speech.
Do you feel Montenegro's leadership, which has effectively been in power for 30 years, often gets an easy ride and that many of these issues that you've mentioned go under the radar, particularly in the Western public. The country is often dubbed to be the frontrunner to join the EU, but the issues you just raised are hardly characteristic of European values, aren't they?
But first, Montenegro is tiny. We cannot really consider ourselves a strategic player in the Balkans unless we make it look like that somehow. Montenegro became member of the NATO, so when it comes to the foreign policy of the important players, that box is ticked. Of course, before the NATO accession, one of the official requirements for Montenegro was to fight organized crime, which we all know didn't happen, but that was somehow ignored due to the political reasons, obviously, and that was one of the tasks that the government delivered to its Western partners. And that was quite frequently the case in the past. The government was quite eager to deliver when it comes to the foreign policy objectives, but when it comes to fighting corruption and organized crime, when it comes to the substance of their crime, then they were derailing, delaying, and finding ways, even when they progress with reforms, to use the opportunity to go backwards whenever it is possible. So, for example, after 2016 elections, when everyone was talking about the coup d'etat, the government hurried up to change some of the laws in order to worsen them, like the law on public procurement, for example, and a number of other laws, in order to basically redo the reforms. And now they're going to again engage with European experts, with European Commission, with other foreign experts, with NGOs, to fix what they already have fixed and then destroy the gap. So those are the games that everyone knows they are playing with them. I don't think that the international community is stupid and not seeing that. I think that they are very well aware of that. But there are bigger problems in their eyes. There are bigger problems in other countries around us. And there is always an issue whether we should be a stable country without causing them certain foreign policy problems and other problems, or we should really be a democracy. I don't think that anyone cares about our democracy as much as they care about their foreign policy objectives, which is legitimate. And unfortunately, our people are not strong enough in a tiny country with 650,000 citizens, where majority of people are working in the public administration. If you don't work for public administration, then you work for one of the tycoons, which is close to the government. So your existence, your basic necessities are covered by the people in power, and you are continuously frightened that you're going to lose everything. You're going to lose pensions, you're going to lose social support, and you're going to lose your salaries if the opposition comes in power. And now you have all these stories about the Russians and all these things. So how the people could make free decisions, how they can make a decision on the basis of what they want, that's simply not going to happen. So I think that that's what and that's why the ruling party is always winning with huge majority, basically. And then the international community says, well, they're a legitimate partner. What to do? And that's a dance which never stops. That's a dance which never stops. And that's not a dance of only Mr. Djukanovic. That's a dance of Vucic. That's a dance of Dodik. That's a dance of all little dictators that we have in the Balkans.
Throughout the series, we've spoken to numerous human rights defenders from the region about their personal motivations to commit their life to this cause, despite the various intimidations and threats and arrests, at times often attacks by state institutions, if not media, right-wing groups, and often with very little international support. Now, I feel this issue is even further complicated in Montenegro due to the deeply embedded presence of organized crime. Now, I have to ask you, what was it that inspired you to go against the grain in this sense and to become an investigative journalist that's going to focus particularly on the relationship between organized crime and corruption and the dynamic it has within state and society?
It wasn't really a decision when we started, okay, let's fight against corruption and organized crime. It was, that life makes puts the choices in front of you and you make a choice whether you will do something or will give up. I can tell you very briefly, and when we started, we were actually working with other NGOs and helping other NGOs do their job. And then there was an opportunity for the first time to actually have people participate and say what they think. At least that's what we believed, and that was a poverty reduction strategy paper, the document which was actually imposed to the government by the World Bank in order to give them more loans. So we asked the people. We first tried to work with NGOs, but mainly NGOs really were a one-man show, and they were not really working with the citizens. So then we tried to give an example of our by doing it ourselves in cooperation with some smaller community groups, and we organized public debates where people said that one of the key causes and key consequences of poverty was corruption. And we were really naive and young at the time. It was happening in 2000, and we approached the government and we said, "Well, people say it's corruption. Let's have some anti-corruption strategy. Let's do something about it." And the government said there is no corruption. You are instructed by opposition political parties to say that there is corruption in order to stop our road to independency. And we promised to all these people, that we are going to actually fight for what they think, because everyone was really not eager to participate. People were saying, "Well, who is going to listen to us? Who cares about what we think?" And we were persuading them, yes, they care about what you think because of all this process with the World Bank, and that it never happened. So that's how we started talking about corruption. And then people started approaching us with concrete cases, with very concrete cases, with evidences, which we started submitting to the prosecution. And when prosecution was not reacting, then we started publishing these cases. And then we realized that some of these cases is not really corruption. It's much bigger thing. It's corruption repeating over and over and over, sometimes in other countries. And then we learned also, quite accidentally, that there are also ways you can track money that is coming from the drug lords. So that's how we came to the organized crime. So it was a series of small decisions that we made, trying to respond to what we saw as a problem, to what many didn't respond because it is dangerous. Because if you respond to it, if you report it to the prosecution, then you risk being arrested by the prosecution yourself. I was under investigation of prosecution on several occasions. I was under investigation of the prosecution for releasing information that the famous organized crime figure wanted by Italian and Swiss authorities for laundering money for Italian organized crime groups is claiming that he has psychological problems and remembering any of the things, which was published by the company which is partly owned by him. So or when we published a recording of buying the IDs, we were interrogated by the prosecution. So that's what you have to face with. It's not like in normal countries. When you discover a crime, you go to the institutions to go further. Everywhere it is risky to investigate organized crime and corruption. You are putting your life at risk. But when you are working in a country where prosecution, where judiciary, where all institutions are part of that and putting enormous efforts into hiding that instead of discovering that and going after you, then it's really challenging. That's why not many people dare to deal with that. The thing that they try to do to us is to somehow really tire us, because you have to fight all the same fights all the time, repeatedly and repeatedly. And even when you succeed, they find a way to go backwards again. So that's really a problem in a small country where it's not easy to find new people, and especially new capable people, for something that you can't really learn at our universities. That's why I think international cooperation is of huge importance, not only to learn from other people, but also to have a network of people who could support you, who could help you in the time of crisis, because frequently you cannot count on much support from your own country because many people are frightened. And then also, that I found the most inspiring, because you can hear stories of the people who live and work in much worse conditions than you do, and they still survive and they still fight. And then you say, well, I have no right to say that I'm having a hard time, because it's much worse somewhere else, and they still do it. And someone has to do it.
Thank you, Vanja. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts. Your commitment is truly inspiring, and we do wish you all the best. For listeners more interested in developments in Montenegro, particularly some of these issues regarding organised crime and corruption within the state, we do invite you to follow the MANS network. That's MANS, an acronym for the Network for the Affirmation of the NGO Sector. Thank you, and speak soon. Bye-bye.